Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, I think we first, Curtis, should give a bit of a shout out to Stephen Whitten there, who kindly introduced us to this show.
Yes.
Who had a little bit of an accident. I mean, he went...
He had a tumble, didn't he, in Paris?
Yes,
Yeah.
in Paris, after recording his Men Able moments for us.
Yeah, he was out and about on the streets of Paris recording Men Able moments for us, and shortly afterwards he fell over. So
we shouldn't laugh. We're laughing.
We should not laugh. No, we hope you're recovering well there, Steve. And
quite sore. He got a bit of attention by the looks of it as well, looking at the pictures. And somebody was kindly doing what they do these days, that someone's laid on the floor with the knee gashed open and thought they'd take some pictures.
Yes. Yeah. Rather than help, I'll take a few photographs.
Yeah. But that's Steve. He probably said, "Go and get some pictures for me social whilst I'm down here." So we are hoping you're getting a bit better and you are back on your feet, literally, Steve, this week. And thanks for doing that. We'll take it back about your failing to do the recording on the top of Eiffel Tower. Because you did do it for us, and you subsequently fell over after recording. So I hope you're feeling a bit better, and your knee or your knees are recovering now.
And I'm sure we'll hear all about it next week when he's back on for his next Men Able moment.
And then the next shout out is IMDA, which I was a part of when we initially set up the Independent Dealer Association. Hits its 1,000 members, and this was always a target that when we formed the association was always on the radar to achieve, and they've done some fantastic work over the years, haven't they, Curtis?
They have indeed, yeah, and that's really good news, and it's good that they've been able to share that. There's a very good piece in Car Dealer this week. There's an interview with Umesh Samani, friend of the podcast, chairman of the IMDA, just going through some of the achievements that the association has had since launching in 2017, and also I thought it was quite interesting some of the associations it now has, because it's got over 50 partners. There's free legal advice, there's DVLA support, and there's also a new after-sales group within the IMDA, and it's sort of giving that added value that Umesh points out would normally only be for larger groups.
Yeah, no, I mean, from an independent dealer perspective, which was what it was focused on, bringing those together collectively to get better deals, better advantages, and be a louder voice in the sector, which is fantastic news. So shout out to Umesh and his colleagues there that lead it, and the work that they're doing for the independent dealer sector.
And we have a shout out for Jack Carfrey, who's a trade journalist, friend of the pod. Might be known to listeners through his work on Business Car and Auto Express, amongst many others. But he's actually based in South Africa, South America. Change continents there for you, Jack. Somewhere near the Andes. And he's not a runner, but he's signed up to run the Chicago Marathon to raise money for the Give Well charity on the 8th of October.
Yeah, well done there, Jack. And it is always interesting to say with his location that if you ever need a phone call with Jack, it's after 4:00 UK time in the afternoon.
Yes.
Is when, because of the time difference there. But no, well done, Jack. And obviously anything we can keep helping to support this, that you're trying to get to £1,000 to give well. And as I say, he's not a marathon runner, so the pain behind this one, Curtis, and he's doing the Chicago Marathon.
Yeah, I know the pain he's going through, but I don't know the sort of how the altitude will factor into that, because that's a whole different ball game. So good luck with the training. And I love the way Jack describes himself as South America's foremost UK used car market journalist, which he is.
That's a title, yeah. And he's
Yeah.
just won an award recently as well for something. So his journalism side of things. So yeah, double shout out there for you, Jack, and hope to speak to you soon.
And this week we've got a very special interview with BYD. So we'll have an extract in this today's show, but the full interview will be available on your podcast feed from Tuesday. And the interview is actually with Simon Bishop, who is BYD's UK head of sales. And he shares some fascinating insights on where the brand is now and where it's going.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
So headlines this week are from Motor Trader, Car Dealer, AM, Motor Trade News and Broker News. Starting with why embracing Omnichannel is a must for used car dealers, how the fall in used EV values has prompted a sales boost. There's also been an increase in extended warranties for cars aged over 10 years old. And we'll finish off with the latest financials from Citygate and Big Motoring World.
So as you say there, Curtis, heading over to motortrader.com, and this is some work that we at Cox Automotive and I did with the Autofocus, our quarterly report, but it was predominantly with the contribution here from Steve Young at ICDP, a friend of the podcast and obviously a regular interviewee, regular guest of the podcast with his bi-monthly updates. But really looking at that omni-channel for the used and that dealer market and how they need to be thinking about it and the benefits of it. So, there's some great insight in this one, Curtis.
There is, yeah. And there was an interesting stat with over 80% of consumers want to combine online steps in the buying journey with steps taken at a physical retail outlet. And I know those stats came from Cox Automotive, but some interesting insights here from Steve about how everything needs to be possibly more joined up, certainly going forwards.
Yeah, no, and he talks about the quality of the website is just one element of a dealer's need to offer. The consumer wants they have tools that allow them to carry out almost every part of the buying journey at home if they so wish, including steps that may have already completed online or in store. So I think what Steve's trying to point out here is that you just got to give that consumer the option of what they want to do online in their own environment, what they want to do in person, and that there is a link between the two, that you don't have to do it again if you've done something in the online space. You don't have to do it again when you get into the dealership itself. So if you've done a part exchange valuation, you've input all the images and the details, everything else, you don't have to go through that whole appraisal process again once you actually enter the showroom there. So for dealers just to think about that process with that connection between the two.
Yeah, and Steve does actually make some interesting points, and it does follow up on conversations we've had on the podcast before about dealers competing with some of the specialist online used car buying platforms. And Steve's saying that retailers must now be more active in this online space to identify and buy stock. As he points out, that they can no longer simply rely on trade-ins as a source of stock. So it's really promoting the dealership as somewhere where you can sell your car, even if you're not going to buy one from the same dealer.
I mean, that's a conversation we've had a few times recently, isn't it?
It is,
with
yeah.
eBay Motors research and with Judge Services, with Neil Adley's research on that buying that car, that source of used car product from direct to the dealer, that you don't have to just necessarily rely on that part exchange. You can offer to buy the cars direct. So yeah, a very, very interesting point there made by Steve.
It reminds me of a conversation I had recently with one franchise dealer who uses a certain popular used car website to actually source stock. So he'll go onto that site and look at stock in his area and his franchise and actively buy, which seems like an obvious thing to do. But I mean, how many dealers are doing that?
No, no, it's definitely one to keep focus on. And heading over to broker news now, and this is some insight that's come out of Indicator, and they're talking about the demand for ex fleet EVs and dealer part exchanges that showed some strength in the month of July, saying that used EV prices fell more into line with the equivalent ICE cars that's been talked about in terms of that parity of pricing now, and that used EV stock is becoming more manageable. And obviously, Indicator don't look just at the UK market; they're obviously right across Europe and looking at their European counterparts of what's happening in this marketplace.
Yeah, this is interesting, and this also follows on from conversations that we pretty much have on a monthly basis with Darren Martin at Cap HPI about how EV prices are falling, and Indicator's research just appears to show that as prices come down, then demand is going up. So it is. It is heading towards that tipping point where used EVs are becoming more affordable to more buyers. So again, this is something that we're going to watch very closely.
Yeah, and they make a point in the story that, that they looked at the used car operation, say that there was a positive response to used EV prices falling by 29% during 2023 so far, and it is it's reduced the major price premium drivers have been forced to pay for EVs previously to bring them more in line with the equivalent petrol and diesel models, as we sort of said before, in terms of that price parity. So, in one way, it's good news. And I've just come off a call internally talking about the iPace that was dropping significantly on a weekly basis. Now, that's in demand now. Dealers are shouting for
Yes.
things like the iPace because they see the value in the product. So there is a market there for EVs, but there's still a lot to do, and the future still looks a little bit choppy, should we say, Curtis, with what's on the horizon. But we can talk about that a little bit more detail with BYD probably.
Yeah, definitely. And heading over to Motor Trade News, the next headline is increase in warranties sold for 10 to 20-year-old cars. So this is based on research by RAC Dealer Network, and it's found that the number of warranties sold for cars aged between 10 and 20 years has actually risen by 67% since the pandemic. So in 2020, the research shows 6% of all policies sold through 1,200 used car retailers were for vehicles in this age range, so pretty low. But during the first 6 months of this year, it has risen to 10%. And at the same time, the number of claims in this category have actually risen from 15 to 21% of the overall total made. Now, we were talking about this before recording that if you rewound a few years, no one was buying warranties for vehicles of this age and profile. But it's becoming more common now because of the cost of living crisis. People are buying older cars and they want to reduce their exposure to risk. So it does make an awful lot of sense to take out an extended warranty from the dealer that's selling it.
No, you're right. And I think, we saw this move particularly through the early days of the stock shortages where retailers were moving into older, higher mileage car. You even saw approved schemes, going from maybe an 80,000 and 5 year limit up to 100,000 miles and 7 year limit. That's continued. I know some of them have changed them since, but, that demand now for older, higher mileage product, that scarcity in that sort of nearly new market continues through the loss of production volumes. But and as you say there, Curtis, that pressure that in terms of the cost of living that remains, that there is a demand now for these older vehicles, and they want to put these warranties on them to protect themselves. So you can understand the logic behind some of this.
Yeah, and the research also shows that there's been an increase in extended warranties for the 5 to 10-year-old bracket of cars. That's actually up 34% over the same period, whilst at the same time, warranties for younger cars aged between 3 to 5-year-olds have actually dropped a little, from 35% to 33%.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I think we'll mention it at the end, but the newsletter will have the link to this story. So if you do want to look at some more of the details, some great research there and stats from Assurant on that marketplace.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
Next up is an extract from our interview with BYD's UK Head of Sales, Simon Bisp. Simon joined the Chinese-owned EV and PHEV brand in May after a long career at Peugeot, where he'll be known to many listeners in his former role as sales director. We caught up with Simon to find out how BYD's UK rollout is going. Yeah, a fascinating insight there. And I think a lot of listeners will be surprised, Simon, by just how long BYD has been around as a company and indeed producing cars. And I was interested in one of the stats that you put out recently, celebrating the 5 millionth unit milestone. So 5 million vehicles in, is that 28, 29 years? And that's a combination of EVs and PHEVs, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what we would call the new energy vehicles is the 5 million, and in fact it's much shorter than that, because our first car was produced in 2005, but it's been in the last 2 or 3 years that production of new energy vehicles has absolutely rocketed. So we became new energy only, so EV and plug-in hybrid only in 2021. So prior to that, we were producing petrol vehicles as well. So it's been in the last few years that really has accelerated to that level. So it's quite astonishing, really.
Yeah, and as we know, BYD launched in the UK in March. Where else is it available in Europe and other markets?
Well, the start was Norway, which I think is quite common, because obviously they were the earliest adopters in terms of EV in Europe, and obviously have followed that transition through to something close to 80% penetration, I think, in terms of full electric vehicles. But it's, we've launched, or we've gone on sale in 16 countries now in Europe in less than 12 months. So it's easier now to say where we're not selling in Europe rather than where we are. So really entered the market at speed once that decision was taken to start selling in Europe. So it's a very aggressive plan and launch.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
Well, that was just a little teaser of the full interview that we did with Simon. It is fascinating what is going on at the moment with BYD. And it's always interesting when you get a new brand launching into the UK. But BYD is one of many brands now. And it's great to hear from early doors what's actually happening at the brand and their future plans.
No, I agree. I mean, people think that BYD is a new entrant and new to not just new to the UK, but new to the automotive sector, and clearly they're not. And clearly they're not just battery electric vehicles either. So yeah, I mean, listen out for the full interview on the from Tuesday morning on your podcast feed, and I think you'll find it a very fascinating interview there with Simon.
And finally, this week, we've got two financial stories, both from car dealers, starting with Citygate Automotive sees profits fall £2 million in 2022 as it faces brand challenges and falling used car prices. Quite a long headline there.
You've got everything into that one. You don't need to read the story now.
No, this story is based around the calendar year of 2022, ending December 31st, and as I say, Citygate dropped by profits at Citygate dropped by £2 million over the course of the year. It's worth giving a bit of context to Citygate because they are a good sized group based in Middlesex. They're multi-franchise. They're particularly strong in VW Group brands with Volkswagen, VW Commercial, Skoda, Seat, and Cupra. Plus, they represent Kia and more recently Aura. And they have over 20 sites around those home counties, Middlesex, Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, and into London.
Yeah, and interestingly, I mean, you sort of cite there around there, the profitability and things like that. And it does feed a little bit into what we were talking about earlier in terms of that cost of living and challenges there, because in the story they do cite there that distribution expenses has increased by 1.8 million to 26.9 million, and that's an increase of 7.29. And that's mainly been driven by increase in staff costs and vehicle costs, and saying that also administration costs has increased by 2.6 million to 20.5 million, and that's an increase of 14.8%. And again, that's saying that it's driven by ongoing investment in IT projects to digitize process and increase operational efficiency. So, this is kind of a dealer there talking about some of the cost of, not necessarily the cost of living, but just general cost increases that they're starting to see across the business, and investment costs as they sort of digitize that business for future operational efficiencies. So again, citing some of the same challenges as some of the other groups have been talking about there, that, yes, benefiting potentially from increased used vehicle margin, but actually, pressures from new vehicle supply and increased costs having a direct influence on the balance sheet of the business.
Yeah, and it does seem like ancient history now, but because it was the last calendar year, a lot of these shortages were down to the semiconductor problems that were restricting supply for much of the year and indeed the previous year. But with supply improving now, Citygate could well be better placed this year, especially with that portfolio of brands and having taken on Aura fairly recently.
Definitely. And the final story of this week, it again comes from Car Dealer and goes against some of the other stories we've covered recently from other supermarket groups, that used car dealer Big Motoring World sees profits soar despite tough trading for supermarket sector, and saying that the pre-tax profit rocketed to 10.9 million in 2022, a rise of over 65%. Turnover rose by 43% from 371 million to 529.7 million. And Big Motoring World parent firm saw that new investment and opened a new site as well. We did talk about that with a friend of the podcast, Pete Waddell, who you can still get that interview on your podcast feed. A fascinating interview there with Pete Waddell, wasn't it, Curtis?
Yeah, Pete Waddell, who founded the business and is still very actively, very much involved. There's some interesting stats within the financials. So, of the profit, £490 million came from vehicle sales. 18.6 million came from finance commission and 20.6 million from warranty sales. So it just shows the strength of the Big Motoring World portfolio there. They're not just selling cars. They're doing very well with finance, very well with warranty, and also a breakdown of unit sales. So used car sales rose by 5,000 units to 27,000 units across the group. That's a pretty impressive figure, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So, in the words of Peter Waddell, go big or go home.
He does, and he does finalise that, saying that expects 2023 to deliver even stronger profits. So we'll certainly cover that as and when we see some results from that one. So yeah, I mean, a lot of news there. As I say, do tune in to the full interview there with Simon from BYD. I'm sure you'll find it very fascinating. It's certainly a brand that is topic of many conversations at the minute across the UK automotive sector.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. As Phil says, we're back on Tuesday with our special interview with BYD's Simon Bisp. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.